She had lived alone for years, until 7 handsome Lakota men knelt at her ranch. One fell for her. She had lived on the ranch for so many years that the land felt like an extension of her own heartbeat. Every morning began the same way. Before the sun fully rose, she would wake to the soft gray light slipping through the thin curtains of her small bedroom window. The air always felt cool at that hour, even in the warmer months. She would sit on the edge of the bed for a moment, listening to the quiet. No traffic, no voices, no distant music. Only the sound of wind brushing against the wooden walls and the faint rustle of leaves from the trees outside. That quiet had once felt heavy, but over time it had become something she depended on. She moved through her routine with care and patience. First came the kettle on the stove. The simple act of making tea had become a daily comfort. As the water heated, she would step outside onto the porch and look across the wide stretch of land that surrounded her home. The ranch was not grand or fancy. It was simple and worn, but it was hers. A long dirt road led to the main gate, and beyond that were fields that changed color with the seasons. In spring, green grass spread across the land like a soft blanket. In summer, the sun painted everything in warm gold. Autumn brought crisp air and falling leaves. Winter covered the fields in quiet white. She had watched these changes year after year, and each season had left its mark on her life. She had not always lived alone. There was a time when the house had felt full. Voices had once filled the rooms and laughter had echoed down the hallway. But life had shifted in ways she had not planned. One by one, people moved away, took new paths, or faded from her daily world. Some changes came gently, others came with more weight. After a while, she realized she was the only one left on the ranch. At first, the silence had been hard to face. Even small sounds like the creak of a floorboard or the ticking of a clock felt too loud in the empty space. She would sometimes leave the radio on just to fill the air with something that sounded like company. Over the years, she learned how to handle everything on her own. She fixed broken fences, carried heavy supplies, and managed the animals that still lived on the land. None of it was easy, but she found strength in doing what needed to be done. Her hands grew rough from work, and her steps became steady and confident. Neighbors from far-off farms respected her independence. When they saw her in town, they would greet her warmly. She always returned the kindness, but she never stayed long. The ranch called her back. It was where she felt most at ease. Her home was modest, but full of small memories. On one wall hung old photographs that had faded slightly over time. They showed moments from years long past, smiles, gatherings, and days that felt brighter. She rarely looked at them for long. Not because they brought pain, but because they reminded her of a different life, one that felt distant now. Instead, she focused on the present. The kitchen table, worn smooth by years of use, was where she planned her days. A notebook often sat there, filled with lists of chores and notes about repairs. Staying busy helped her avoid thinking too deeply about the loneliness that sometimes crept in during quiet evenings. Despite the solitude, she was not unhappy. She found peace in small things: the sound of birds at dawn, the smell of fresh earth after rain, and the sight of stars filling the night sky gave her comfort. Some evenings, she would sit on the porch with a cup of tea and watch the horizon fade into darkness. There was a certain beauty in being alone under such a wide sky. It made her feel small in a gentle way, as if her worries were not as heavy as they once seemed. Still, there were moments when she felt the weight of having no one to share the day with. Sometimes she caught herself talking aloud while working, as if someone might answer. Other times, she imagined what it would be like to have a visitor stop by just to chat for a while. But she quickly brushed those thoughts aside. She had learned to protect her peace. Letting people too close again felt risky. The ranch had become a safe space where she could live without fear of sudden change. People in nearby areas often wondered how she managed everything alone. A few offered help now and then, but she politely declined unless it was truly necessary. She did not want to rely on anyone. Dependence had once led to disappointment, and she had promised herself she would never feel that way again. Independence became her shield. It allowed her to move through life on her own terms, even if it meant facing long days without conversation. Her days followed a rhythm that rarely changed. Mornings were for feeding animals and checking the fences. Afternoons were spent fixing what needed repair or tending to the garden behind the house. Evenings were quiet. After dinner, she would sit by the window or read from an old book she had read many times before. The stories in those books felt like familiar friends. They filled the silence without demanding anything from her. The land itself seemed to understand her. When storms came, she prepared carefully, securing doors and moving supplies to safe places. When the sun shone bright, she worked under its warmth with steady focus. The ranch tested her strength at times, but it also gave her purpose. Every task she completed reminded her that she was capable. She had built a life from patience and effort, and she was proud of that. Years passed in this steady way. The outside world changed, but her daily routine stayed much the same. She did not seek excitement. She valued calm days and predictable nights. To others, her life might have seemed lonely, but to her, it felt stable. She had learned to find meaning in quiet work and simple routines. That stability was something she had worked hard to protect. Yet deep inside there remained a small part of her that wondered if life might hold something more. Not something loud or dramatic, but something gentle. A shared cup of tea, a friendly voice at the end of the day. A reminder that she was not entirely alone in the world. She did not dwell on those thoughts often. When they surfaced, she pushed them aside and focused on her tasks. Still, they never disappeared completely. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, she stood by the fence line and looked across the open land. The wind moved gently through the grass, creating a soft, steady sound. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Life on the ranch had shaped her into someone strong and self-reliant. She had faced challenges and found ways to keep going. The quiet had become her companion, and she had learned to live with it. She did not know that change was on its way. For years her days had followed the same peaceful pattern. She believed they would continue that way, but life often moves in unexpected directions. As she walked back toward the house that evening, carrying a small bucket of tools, she felt a strange sense that something beyond her routine might soon arrive. She could not explain why. Perhaps it was only a passing thought, carried on the wind. For now, though, everything remained as it always had been. The ranch stood quiet under the fading light. The house waited with its familiar warmth. She stepped inside, set her tools by the door, and prepared for another calm evening. The silence returned, steady and dependable. She had grown used to it. It wrapped around her like a well-worn blanket. And as night settled over the land, she believed that her life would continue just as it had for so many years. Simple, steady, and alone. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ranch. It was one of those quiet days when the air felt still, and even the animals moved slowly, as if the heat had settled over everything like a soft blanket. She had spent most of the day repairing a section of fence near the far end of the property. The work had taken longer than expected, but she did not mind. Slow work meant fewer thoughts, and fewer thoughts meant more peace. She wiped her hands on a cloth and stood up straight, stretching her back. From where she stood, she could see the long dirt road that led to the main gate. It was a road that rarely saw visitors. Some weeks passed without a single vehicle driving by. That was how she preferred it. Unexpected arrivals often brought noise and change, and she had grown comfortable with routine. As she gathered her tools, a faint sound reached her ears. At first she thought it was only the wind shifting through the trees, but then she heard it again, a low rumble that did not belong to the quiet land. She turned her head toward the road. A small cloud of dust was rising in the distance, moving slowly but steadily closer. Her first instinct was caution. She rarely received visitors, and no one had mentioned coming by. She stood still for a moment, watching the dust grow larger. Soon, the shape of a vehicle appeared through the haze. It moved carefully along the road, as if the driver was unsure of the path. She felt a mix of curiosity and concern. Visitors were not common, but they were not impossible either. Sometimes travelers lost their way or needed directions. She reminded herself to stay calm. The vehicle slowed as it reached the main gate. It came to a stop, and for a few seconds nothing happened. Then the doors opened. 7 men stepped out, moving in a calm and respectful manner. They looked around the ranch with quiet interest, not in a way that felt intrusive, but more like travelers taking in a new place. She stayed where she was, watching from a distance. She did not feel afraid, but she remained careful. Years of living alone had taught her to observe before approaching. One of the men noticed her and raised a hand in greeting. The gesture was polite and simple. She hesitated for a moment before walking toward them. Her steps were steady, though her mind was alert. As she drew closer, she could see that they carried themselves with calm confidence. There was nothing rushed or demanding in their manner. When she reached a comfortable distance, she stopped and waited. The man who had greeted her stepped forward slightly, keeping a respectful space between them. He spoke in a calm voice and explained that they were traveling through the area. Their vehicle had begun to make trouble on the road, and they had pulled over to check it. They had seen the ranch and hoped to ask if they could rest nearby for a short while until they arranged help. His tone was careful and kind, and he thanked her for even listening. She listened quietly, studying their faces and their body language. They did not seem careless or loud. They stood patiently, as if ready to accept whatever answer she gave. She felt a small sense of relief. Their presence was unexpected, but it did not feel threatening. Still, she had lived alone for years and had grown used to guarding her space. She thought carefully before responding. After a moment, she nodded and told them they could stay near the outer area by the fence while they figured out their situation. She made it clear that she valued peace and order on the ranch. They agreed quickly and thanked her more than once. Their gratitude seemed genuine. One of them offered to check the fence they had parked near, noticing that a section looked worn. She was surprised by the offer but allowed it. While they examined their vehicle, she returned to her work, though she found herself glancing toward them now and then. They moved with purpose, speaking to one another in calm tones. After a while, 2 of them approached and asked if they could help with the fence she had been repairing earlier. She hesitated again, then agreed. They worked carefully, asking questions when needed and following her lead. Their willingness to help without being asked twice caught her attention. As the afternoon passed, the ranch felt different. The quiet was still there, but it was filled with low conversation and the sound of shared work. She realized she had not heard that kind of sound on the land in a long time. It was not unpleasant. In fact, it felt oddly comforting. They did not intrude on her space or ask too many questions. They simply worked alongside her, offering help where it was needed. When the sun began to lower, she realized they had likely not eaten since arriving. She considered her options for a moment. She was not used to cooking for others anymore, but something in their respectful manner made her feel at ease. She invited them to share a simple meal outside near the porch. They accepted with quiet gratitude. She prepared a basic dinner. Nothing fancy, but enough to share. They sat at a distance that felt comfortable, careful not to crowd her. Conversation began slowly. They spoke about their travels and the work they did in different communities. Their stories were thoughtful and calm. They spoke of places they had seen and people they had met along the way. He listened more than she spoke, but she found herself asking small questions. It had been a long time since she had been curious about others' journeys. One of them stood out in a quiet way. "Bide." He did not speak much, but when he did, his words were thoughtful. He noticed small details, like the way she organized tools, or how she cared for the animals. He thanked her for the meal and for allowing them to rest on the land. His voice carried a sincerity that was hard to ignore. She felt a small sense of warmth, though she kept her guard up. As evening settled over the ranch, the sky filled with soft colors that slowly deepened into night. They offered to clean up after the meal, and she allowed it. Watching them move around the porch with care felt unfamiliar but not unwelcome. The ranch had been silent for so long that even these small sounds felt new. She realized she was not as uncomfortable as she might have expected. They assured her they would arrange for their vehicle to be repaired as soon as possible and would not stay longer than necessary. She appreciated their consideration. Before they settled for the night near the outer part of the ranch, they thanked her once more. Their respect for her space remained clear. She returned to the house and closed the door, leaning against it for a moment. Inside, the house felt different. It was still quiet, but not in the same way as before. There were people outside now, resting under the wide sky. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out toward the faint glow of their small lantern. She wondered how long they would stay. Probably only a day or two, she thought. Travelers rarely lingered. Still, something about their arrival had shifted the feeling of the day. The routine she had followed for so many years had been gently interrupted. Not in a way that felt chaotic, but in a way that felt alive. She did not fully understand the feeling, and she did not want to think too much about it. Change could be complicated. She had built her life on steadiness. She finished her tea and prepared for bed. As she lay down, she listened to the familiar sounds of the ranch at night. The wind moved softly outside, and the wooden walls creaked gently. Yet beneath those familiar sounds, there was a new awareness. She was not entirely alone on the land tonight. That thought felt strange, but not unsettling. The next morning would likely bring more questions, more conversations, and perhaps more shared work. She did not know what to expect, and she preferred not to guess. For now, she closed her eyes and let the quiet carry her into sleep. Outside, under the wide sky, the unexpected visitors rested peacefully, and without realizing it, her quiet life had begun to shift in small, steady ways. Morning arrived slowly over the ranch, just as it always did. The sky shifted from deep blue to soft gray, and then to pale gold as the sun began to rise. She woke earlier than usual, not because of noise, but because of awareness. For the first time in many years, she remembered that there were people outside on her land. That thought alone felt strange. She lay still for a moment, listening. The house remained quiet, but beyond the walls she could sense gentle movement, like the start of a new day shared with others. She got up and went through her usual routine. The kettle went on the stove. The familiar sounds of morning gave her comfort. Still, there was a slight difference in the air. When she stepped onto the porch with her cup of tea, she saw that the men were already awake. They had gathered near their vehicles, speaking quietly. One of them waved in greeting, careful not to be too loud. She returned the gesture with a small nod. It did not take long before two of them approached, asking if there was any work they could help with while they waited for news about their vehicle. Their tone was polite, and they stood at a respectful distance. She hesitated, then gave them simple tasks. Nothing too personal, nothing too close to the house. They accepted without question. Soon, the sound of tools and light conversation filled the air. It was not loud or overwhelming. It felt steady, calm, and organized. As the morning passed, she found herself observing them more closely. They worked with care, paying attention to details. When they repaired a section of fence, they did it properly, not in a rushed way. When they carried supplies, they moved with patience. They spoke to one another in low, respectful tones. There was no sense of urgency or disorder. Their presence felt balanced, almost like they understood the rhythm of the land. She joined them for a short time to show where extra tools were kept. During that moment, conversation began to grow naturally. They spoke about their travels, the places they had visited, and the communities they supported. Their stories were not dramatic or exaggerated. They spoke in a calm, thoughtful way, sharing lessons they had learned from the road. She listened quietly, occasionally asking a small question. It had been a long time since she had listened to new stories, and she realized she had missed that feeling more than she had admitted. Around midday, she suggested a break. The sun had grown stronger, and everyone needed rest. They sat in the shade near the porch. She brought out water and simple food. Again, they thanked her for her kindness. Their gratitude did not feel forced. It was steady and sincere. One of them spoke about the importance of helping others when possible, even in small ways. His words stayed with her. She had spent years believing that solitude was the only way to stay safe. Now she wondered if small moments of connection could exist without bringing trouble. The man who had stood out the evening before remained quiet but attentive. He noticed when she needed help carrying something heavy and offered assistance without making it seem like she could not manage on her own. He respected her independence. That respect made her feel comfortable in a way she did not expect. They spoke briefly about the land, the weather, and the changing seasons. Their conversation was simple but meaningful. It felt easy, without pressure. As the days stretched on, their stay lasted longer than planned. The vehicle needed more work than expected, and help from town would take time. They kept her informed, never assuming they could remain without permission. Each time they updated her, they thanked her again for allowing them to stay. She realized she did not mind their presence as much as she had feared. In fact, the ranch felt different. The quiet still existed, but it was shared now. It no longer felt heavy. Evenings became a time for stories. After the day's work was done, they would gather near the porch or by a small fire set at a safe distance. The sky above them stretched wide and full of stars. She had always loved the night sky, but now she saw it in a new way. Listening to others speak while looking at the stars made the world feel larger and yet more connected. They shared memories of their childhoods, lessons from elders, and moments that had shaped their lives. She listened closely. Some stories made her smile. Others made her think. Slowly, she began to share a few stories of her own. Not everything, just small pieces. She spoke about the ranch, about the years she had spent building her life there. She spoke about learning to manage everything alone and about the comfort she found in routine. They listened with respect, never interrupting, never asking for more than she wanted to give. That kind of listening felt rare. It made her feel seen, without making her feel exposed. The man who had grown closest to her spoke carefully. He did not try to impress or push for attention. Instead, he spoke when it felt right. He shared his appreciation for the land and for the way she cared for it. He noticed how organized her tools were and how well she knew every part of the ranch. He admired her strength but did not treat her like a story to be admired from afar. He treated her like a person with a steady life and quiet wisdom. One afternoon they worked side by side repairing a gate that had been loose for months. The work required patience and teamwork. As they adjusted the hinges and secured the wood, they spoke about simple things, weather patterns, long journeys, and the feeling of finding a place that felt calm. She realized that she felt calm while working with him. There was no rush in his movements, no pressure in his words. Just a steady presence that matched the pace of the ranch. Days turned into a gentle routine. Mornings began with shared greetings. Work was done together when needed. Meals were simple but shared with gratitude. Evenings brought quiet conversations under the open sky. She found herself looking forward to those moments. For years she had believed that being alone was the only way to live without worry. Now she saw that company, when respectful and kind, could exist without taking away her peace. Still, she remained careful with her emotions. She had built strong walls over the years, and those walls did not disappear overnight. She reminded herself that their stay was temporary. They would leave once their vehicle was repaired. The ranch would return to its quiet state. That thought brought a mix of relief and something else she could not quite name. She did not want to depend on their presence, yet she could not deny that it had brought a sense of warmth back into her days. One evening, as the sun set in soft shades of orange and gold, she stood by the fence and watched the light fade. He joined her at a respectful distance. They did not speak at first. They simply watched the sky change colors. After a while, he spoke about how peaceful the ranch felt and how grateful he was for the time spent there. His voice carried honesty. She nodded, unsure of what to say. She felt a quiet understanding forming between them, something built from shared work and simple moments. As night fell, she returned to the house and sat by the window with a cup of tea. She looked out at the faint glow of their lanterns and listened to the low sound of their conversation. The ranch felt alive in a way it had not in years. She knew their stay would not last forever, But the time they spent there had already changed something inside her. She did not feel as closed off as before. She did not feel as alone. She set her cup down and looked around the house. The familiar walls, the worn furniture, the quiet corners, all of it remained the same. Yet her perspective felt slightly different. The land had always been her comfort, but now she saw that connection did not always bring trouble. Sometimes it brought understanding. Sometimes it brought quiet companionship that asked for nothing more than respect. As she prepared for bed, she felt both calm and thoughtful. She did not know what the next days would bring. Perhaps their vehicle would be fixed soon. Perhaps they would leave and continue their journey. Whatever happened, she knew that this unexpected time had already left a mark. It had reminded her that life could still surprise her, even after years of routine. She lay down and listened to the night sounds once more. The wind moved gently across the fields. The stars shone above the wide land. And somewhere outside, the visitors rested peacefully. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel the weight of complete solitude. Instead, she felt a quiet sense of connection, gentle and steady, like a new path beginning to form just beyond the horizon. The days continued to pass with a calm and steady rhythm. What had first felt like a brief and unexpected visit had slowly become a gentle part of her daily life. The men were still waiting for the repairs to be completed on their vehicle, and while they remained on the ranch, they continued to help wherever they could. Their presence no longer felt unusual. Instead, it felt like a quiet addition to the land, as natural as the changing light of morning and evening. She woke one morning to the sound of light footsteps outside the house. It was not loud or disruptive. It was simply the sound of someone moving carefully, respecting the stillness of the early hour. She sat up and realized that she no longer felt tense when she heard those sounds. That realization surprised her. For years, any unexpected noise had made her alert and cautious. Now she felt calm. After stepping outside with her cup of tea, she saw them already at work near the far fence. They had noticed a section that needed stronger support and had begun fixing it without being asked. When they saw her, they greeted her with warm but quiet smiles. She returned the greeting and walked closer, observing the work. It was done properly, with patience and attention to detail. She thanked them for helping, and one of them replied that they were grateful for the chance to give back while they waited. As the sun rose higher, the day warmed quickly. She joined them for a while, handing tools and holding boards steady while repairs were made. Working together had become easy. There was no need for long explanations. Everyone understood their role. The shared effort created a quiet sense of teamwork that felt comforting. It reminded her of a time long ago when the ranch had been filled with more than one pair of hands. She had not allowed herself to think about those days and years, but now the memories returned in a gentle way, without sadness. The man who had grown closest to her remained thoughtful in his actions. He did not try to stand out or draw attention. Instead, he worked steadily and spoke only when it felt right. He often asked about the history of the ranch, how long she had lived there, what changes she had seen over the years, and what she loved most about the land. She answered slowly, sometimes pausing to find the right words. She realized that she had not spoken about her life in such detail for a long time. Telling these small pieces of her story felt both strange and comforting. One afternoon, while they rested in the shade, he asked what had first brought her to the ranch. The question was simple, but it made her think. She looked out across the fields before answering. She spoke about wanting a place where she could build something steady and quiet. She spoke about finding peace and routine and comfort in the land. She did not share every detail of her past, but she shared enough for him to understand that her independence had been shaped by experience. He listened carefully, without interrupting, and thanked her for trusting him with that part of her story. His response stayed with her. Trust was not something she gave easily. Over the years, she had learned to keep her distance from most people. Yet here she was, sitting under the open sky, sharing parts of her life with someone she had only recently met. It felt unusual, but it did not feel wrong. She realized that trust did not always have to come from long years of knowing someone. Sometimes it could grow from shared work, respectful silence, and simple kindness. As evening approached, the group gathered near the porch for another shared meal. The sky turned soft shades of pink and gold, and the air cooled gently. Laughter rose now and then as they spoke about small, light-hearted moments from their travels. She found herself smiling more often than she had in years. The ranch, once so quiet, now held a steady warmth. It was not loud or chaotic. It was calm, like a peaceful gathering that asked for nothing more than presence. Still, she knew that their time there was limited. News had arrived that the repairs to their vehicle were nearly complete. They would likely be ready to leave within a few days. That thought brought a mix of feelings she had not expected. Part of her felt relieved. Her life had been built on routine and solitude, and she knew she would return to that rhythm once they left. But another part of her felt a quiet sadness. Their presence had brought a gentle change to her days, and she would miss the shared work and conversation. She did not speak about those feelings. Instead, she focused on making the most of the time that remained. The next morning she suggested a larger repair project that she had been putting off for months. They agreed to help. Together, they worked on strengthening a section of the barn that had begun to show wear. The work took most of the day, but it felt satisfying. By the time they finished, the structure stood firm and secure. She felt proud of what they had accomplished together. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, she walked along the fence line with the man who had become her quiet companion. They moved slowly, watching the light fade across the fields. He spoke about how much the time on the ranch had meant to him and the others. He said they had found peace there and appreciated her willingness to share her space. His words were sincere. She listened, unsure how to respond. She felt the weight of the moment but did not want to rush it. He did not ask for anything from her. He did not make promises or push for answers. Instead, he simply said that meeting her had been an unexpected gift. He admired her strength and the life she had built. He hoped that, even after they left, they might cross paths again someday. His tone was calm, not demanding. It left space for her to think and feel without pressure. She stood quietly for a moment, looking out over the land. The sky above them was wide and filled with soft color. She felt a gentle shift inside her, like a door opening just slightly. For years she had believed that her life would remain unchanged, steady, and alone. Now she realized that change did not always have to bring chaos. Sometimes it arrived quietly, through shared days and simple conversations. As they walked back toward the house, she felt both calm and thoughtful. She knew that their departure would come soon. The ranch would return to its familiar quiet. Yet something inside her had already changed. She had allowed herself to connect, even in small ways. She had allowed herself to trust, even if only a little. That night she sat by the window with her usual cup of tea. The lights from their lanterns glowed softly outside. She listened to the low sound of their voices and felt a sense of gratitude. Their visit had reminded her that solitude did not have to mean isolation. It was possible to share space and still keep her peace. It was possible to welcome connection without losing herself. She did not know what would happen after they left. She did not know if she would see them again or if this would remain a brief chapter in her life. But she knew that the days they had spent on the ranch had brought something valuable back into her world. They had brought warmth, understanding, and a reminder that even the most quiet lives could still hold room for new beginnings. As she prepared for bed, she felt a gentle sense of anticipation mixed with calm acceptance. The future remained uncertain, but it no longer felt closed. Somewhere beyond the routine she had followed for so long, a new possibility had begun to form. And though she did not fully understand what that possibility might become, she felt ready to face it with an open heart and steady steps. The morning light arrived gently, spilling gold across the wide fields of the ranch. She rose slowly, aware that this might be one of the last days she would spend with her unexpected guests. A quiet tension hummed in the air. Not unpleasant, but different from the calm she had grown used to over years of solitude. She moved through her morning routine with care, pouring tea, preparing a small breakfast, and stepping outside to watch the men begin their day. They were quiet, respectful, and patient, as always, but today there was a sense of finality in their movements. They had been on the ranch for several days now, long enough for the rhythm of life to shift slightly. The land had begun to feel fuller, warmer, and somehow more alive. Animals moved with a gentle curiosity around the men, and even the air seemed different, carrying the sounds of laughter, conversation, and shared work that had been absent for years. She felt a strange mixture of comfort and uncertainty. She was grateful for their presence, yet she knew that soon she would return to her familiar solitude. After breakfast, the man who had grown closest to her approached quietly. He asked if she would walk with him along one of the paths she took to inspect her fields. She agreed, feeling a flutter of anticipation mixed with an unfamiliar nervousness. They walked together side by side, but at a respectful distance. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of earth and growing grass. For a while they walked in silence, simply observing the land and listening to the faint sounds of the ranch waking up. Finally he spoke. He told her how much he had admired her during their stay, the way she worked, the way she cared for her animals, and the way she had managed a life built on independence. His words were gentle, honest, and unhurried. He did not pressure her to respond immediately. Instead, he simply shared what he felt, and that alone seemed to make the moment heavier with meaning. She felt a warmth spread inside her, one that she had not realized she had missed. She responded slowly, carefully choosing words that reflected her own feelings. She admitted that their presence had changed her perception of what life could be. For the first time in years, she felt that connection and companionship were not threats to her independence. She told him that she had valued her quiet life deeply, but that she had also discovered how small shared moments could bring joy without diminishing her peace. His quiet smile said more than words could, and she felt a rare sense of ease in his presence. The day moved forward with a mixture of routine and quiet preparation. The men packed their belongings, checked their vehicle, and ensured that everything was ready for departure. She helped where needed, though she noticed the subtle care they took to allow her to remain in control. There was a mutual respect in every action, a balance that had made their stay feel comfortable and natural. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting warm light across the fields, highlighting the gentle movements of people and animals alike. Before leaving, the group gathered near the porch to express their gratitude. They thanked her for her generosity, her hospitality, and the chance to rest and work on her land. They spoke about the lessons they had learned from her strength and independence, and how much her kindness had meant to them. She listened, touched by the sincerity of their words. Though she had expected only a brief interaction, she realized that this small period of shared time had created a lasting impression on everyone involved. The man who had become closest to her lingered for a moment. He knelt briefly, a gesture of respect, gratitude, and humility. It was not dramatic, but it was deeply sincere. He told her that he hoped to return someday, not as a traveler in need, but as someone who genuinely wanted to continue their connection. She did not reply immediately, knowing that words could not fully capture the mix of emotions inside her. Instead, she gave a small, knowing smile. She told him that the ranch would always welcome good people, leaving the invitation open without promise or expectation. They departed slowly, moving down the dirt road that led away from the ranch. She watched their vehicle disappear into the distance, feeling a mixture of sadness and gratitude. The land, once filled with a gentle hum of their presence, returned to its familiar quiet. Yet something inside her had changed. The stillness no longer felt heavy or lonely. She understood that life could remain calm and steady while still holding space for meaningful connection. In the days that followed, she returned to her routines, tending to her fields, feeding her animals, and repairing fences as she always had. Yet she did so with a newfound awareness. She had learned that her life did not need to be completely solitary to remain fulfilling. She could protect her independence while allowing trust, warmth, and companionship to enter in small, gentle ways. The quiet of the ranch no longer felt like a burden. It now felt like a canvas, capable of holding both solitude and meaningful connection. Evenings returned with a familiar rhythm of stars spreading across the sky. She would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the fields bathed in moonlight. The memory of the men lingered softly in her mind, not as a longing for their return, but as a reminder that life could change in quiet, meaningful ways. She felt gratitude for the time they had spent together and for the lessons that had come from it. One afternoon, as she walked along the fence line, she realized that the land felt different. It was still her home, still her sanctuary, but it carried the gentle memory of shared days, conversations, and laughter. The wind moved through the fields as it always had, but now it seemed to carry possibility, a reminder that even the most steady lives could still hold room for new beginnings. She understood finally that life's richness came not just from independence and routine, but also from the courage to welcome connection when it arrived. That courage was quiet and subtle, like the slow opening of a flower at dawn. It required patience, trust, and care. She had found that courage in herself, and it had allowed her heart to feel again in ways she had thought long forgotten. As night fell, she sat once more on the porch, looking out across the ranch. The stars shone brightly, stretching endlessly above the land. She felt peace in her solitude, but also hope for what the future might bring. She did not know if the paths of life would cross with those men again, or if this experience would remain a chapter in her story. But she knew that she had been changed, strengthened, and reminded of the quiet beauty that connection could bring. For the first time in many years, she felt the possibility of life beyond complete solitude. The ranch remained her home, her refuge, and her strength, but now it also held the memory of shared kindness, respect, and gentle companionship. She smiled softly to herself, knowing that her quiet life had room for more than she had ever imagined, and that a new chapter had quietly begun, waiting to unfold in its own time. Her hands rested on her lap as she looked out over the fields. The land was vast and steady, just as it had always been. But now her heart carried a quiet warmth that was entirely new. She realized that living alone did not mean living without connection. She had learned that love, respect, and companionship could arrive gently, quietly, and unexpectedly, and that sometimes the smallest gestures could leave the deepest marks. The ranch slept under the wide night sky. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, filled with gratitude, hope, and the steady confidence that she could embrace both her independence and the quiet promise of connection. Life, she understood, had a way of surprising even the most careful hearts, and sometimes those surprises were the most beautiful gifts of all.